The human desire to seek decent employment and livelihoods is at the core of the nexus between migration and development. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in September 2015, provides for a strong link between decent work and migration in sustainable development goals on promoting inclusive and sustainable economic development. Recognition of human mobility is a key factor for sustainable development. So, today we'll discuss the nexus between migration and development, and I'm pleased to welcome Kristijan Fidanovski, Zenebe Uraguchi, and Elena Slashidze. Kristijan is a Barnett Scholar at the University of Oxford. For his research, he is exploring the relationship between ideology and fertility in Eastern Europe, where low birth rates, often coupled with high brain drain, are leading to unsustainably small relative workforce size. Zenebe is a development economist with multi-country experience in Asia, North America, Eastern Europe, and Africa. His professional background started working with a multinational private company, Toyota, as international trade manager, and with the Development Research Institute before moving to international development with Helvetas. Elena is an economic development practitioner currently leading the programmatic areas at the Optim project in Moldova. Zenebe, let me start with you. Migration has increasingly become a complex phenomenon affecting social, economic, and political aspects of regions and countries. A lot has been said and written about the migration development nexus. What do you think about it? What are the key issues?
It's true that a lot has been written and said about migration. Migration is a newsworthy topic for good or ill. Millions of people are on the move, and this captures the attention of policymakers and citizens. As we speak, there are more than 270 million people on the move, international migrants. This figure equals just about 3.5% of the world's population. Yet migration is not new. Mobility has been part of human history, and it has been an important source of livelihood strategy. But what I think seems to be a bit different for the past few years is the acceleration and complexity of migration. There are a number of macro and micro push and pull factors or reasons. At the macro level, for example, you have change in political stability, meaning rising conflicts. You have also demographic transition or dynamics. You have environment and climate change, the so-called climate migrants. At the same time, at macro level, you have individuals and communities in search of improved living conditions, to rejoin family, or in response to economic opportunities or aspirations to migrate to other countries. But here, we also need to recognize that drivers of migration often overlap. This means that there is often no single argument for an individual to decide to leave his or her place of origin. Within the intensified or accelerated level of migration, and in its complex relationship with development, I see three important issues. The first issue is the evidence on migration development connection, or the so-called nexus, has grown, but it's still very thin. It's very, very weak.
So what does this mean?
In practice, This means that there are many blank spaces on the regional and global evidence of migration development connection that needs to be built, that needs to be improved through generating accurate and comparable data. So that's the first issue. The second issue is also the migration development discussion has increasingly entered into the public debate in terms of the shift to security, migration, and then development connection. Third, as an important issue that I see for the past 2 decades is the current global frameworks are inadequate to address today's complex global migration dynamics.
Kristijan, migration and demographic challenges have various effects in the political, social, and economic areas and are impacting the societies in the Balkans and generally Eastern Europe. What does this mean for the future of workforce in the region?
It has a lot of different implications, and I'll start with the political ones, because those are the most short-term effects and the most visible effects as well. So they're a little easier to discuss. And there's this paradox, right? Because so many young people are leaving our countries in the region because they're not happy with their governments, and those governments are often, conservative, or at least more conservative than the young people that are leaving. So they're running away from conservative political options, politicians and parties. But then by leaving, they're actually making the countries more conservative because the population that stays is on average more conservative. So politically, conservative parties tend to benefit from out-migration, from the brain drain of young and well-educated people. Of course, these people can still vote in national elections even when they live abroad, but the impact of the diaspora vote, of course, is always relatively insignificant. And they tend not to vote a lot of the times as well once they have left their country. So politically speaking, conservative parties do seem to stand to benefit, at least in the short term, not only from brain drain, but also from population aging as a whole, because it has been proven in many countries that as populations age, and basically as an individual person within a population gets older, they tend to vote more conservative. So of course, young people today in the region are also as progressive as young people have ever been in history. So it'll remain to be seen whether these young people, when they get older, whether they will confirm this trend, whether they will also become more conservative with age, or whether actually for the first time there might be an exception to this. So maybe this cohort, this particular cohort of young people today will stay progressive even as they get older. So it's long term, it's not as clear, but short term, it seems that conservative parties are favored by the current demographic situation. Socioeconomically, though, things are a little more complicated, but also more important to analyze, even though socioeconomic effects can be difficult to predict and examine. But the most important part to mention is that overall, brain drain has a triple, I would say, negative effect on workforce size. So first, of course, with people of working age leaving, the workforce is shrinking, right? Then second, these people have their children abroad, which means that the workforce is depleted of future workers as well, because when these children grow up, they will most likely stay in their new countries. And then the third effect is that when those children, so the generation that is lost because of their parents migrating today, when those children become of reproductive age, they will be in their new countries, and therefore 20 or 25 or 30 years from now, a so-called negative fertility echo will be felt, meaning that fertility can be expected to suffer negatively from this even one generation later. What does this mean for population aging? Well, in demography, the concept that is usually used to analyze this is the old age dependency ratio, meaning that, and the ratio basically compares people who are aged 65 or older and the working age population. And this ratio in 2000 in Europe as a whole was 1:4, which was not great even then. But there were 4 working age people supporting 1 retired person in the population. So that was much more sustainable than the situation today. And the situation is expected to become much worse and is already progressively becoming worse. Some estimates are suggesting that by 2050, in Europe as a whole, the ratio might become 1 to 2. So only 2 working age adults for a single retired person in the population. So you can imagine what that means for pension systems and therefore for society as a whole. So as is the case elsewhere in the world, there is a need clearly to raise the retirement age, which is not a very popular political proposition. We know what happened in Russia when Russia tried to increase the retirement age, massive protests, and that's probably the reason why many countries in the region, governments in the region, are hesitant to go down this road. But they might have to do so very soon. But unfortunately, currently, actually, in North Macedonia, there is a law in parliamentary procedure which goes in the opposite direction. So the law is stipulating that public sector employees will have to retire at 64. 64 was actually the minimum retirement age in North Macedonia, even now, without this law. But it's possible under the status quo for people to continue to work longer than that if they want to. It's 64 for men, by the way, and 62 for women. So this law is actually moving things in the opposite direction, and I mentioned the gender gap as well, which is very paradoxical, and it's still there in most East European countries. It's not just in North Macedonia. Women can retire earlier, even though they tend to live longer. And in North Macedonia, they live up to 4 years longer than men on average. So there is no factual basis for this gender gap in the retirement age to persist. And in fact, in most non-East European countries, it's not there. So it's very much a socialist legacy, which is exacerbating population aging.
For your research, you're exploring the relationship between ideology and fertility in Eastern Europe. How do you think these regional migration and demographic trends could affect the domestic policies in these countries?
It is a big problem throughout the region. And we all know about this number of 2.1 children per woman, right? Which is necessary for a country to replace itself, the so-called replacement level. Well, Eastern Europe has long fallen below this level. Even Kosovo, which is the closest at 2.0, according to some estimates, is still below this level. And it's not irrelevant whether a country is at 1.3, for example, or 1.8. So this is all bad because it's lower than 2.1. But there are still some important differences in terms of population aging. So to give one example, Bosnia and Herzegovina has an exceptionally low fertility rate of 1.3. And if we compare it to Russia, for example, with 1.7, Russia has attempted a very extensive birth raising policy consisting of child-related allowances to parents, which can only be used for specific purposes, mainly housing, but also some other reasons. And in Russia, 1.7 is the fertility that we have now as a result, mainly of this policy, but also other societal trends. So it's an example of how policy can actually make a difference. I'm not saying that the increase in Russia was solely due to policy, and I'm not saying that this is replicable in other countries. But if we take the current situation, 1.7 fertility in Russia, the Russian population, if fertility and life expectancy stay the same in the foreseeable future, the Russian population will have, so it will become twice as small as it is today in 112 years from now. So that's actually relatively, depressing. It's still a negative phenomenon, but when you compare it to Bosnia and Herzegovina, where at fertility of 1.3, it can be expected to have in 45 years. There's clearly a very big difference. So in the Bosnian case, it will happen within most of our lifetimes if nothing is done about this. So fertility clearly has to be raised. And of course, raising fertility can very easily be instrumentalized by conservative politicians. It can sound like a rallying cry, for saving the nation, and, our culture will disappear, et cetera, et cetera. So it can be abused, of course, but it should be considered a pan-ideological issue. So liberal, progressive parties should think very seriously about it as well, because as we discussed earlier, it has very palpable socioeconomic implications. So it's not just child-related allowances that can be attempted in dealing with this. There is also parental leave, which has to be diversified. In Eastern Europe, it is notoriously non-diversified compared to Western Europe. Fathers use way too few days of parental leave, even when they're, so the most important aspect is probably to reserve some days for mandatory use by the fathers, because when it's optional, because of cultural norms, many fathers opt not to use these days, even though they're allowed by law. And also childcare and daycare availability and affordability, especially, is another important weakness of many East European countries. So only a combination of all of these family policies can help increase fertility in the future.
So, Elena, you are a migrant worker yourself. Do you feel as if you have taken something away from your community back home, or do you see migration as a positive phenomenon? And does migration enrich societies and catalyze knowledge sharing and speed up development?
It's a very interesting question. And this is something that I've been reflecting along all my migration stages, let's put it that way. So I currently live in Moldova, but I'm coming from Georgia. And I also had some past migration experiences in my life. And the way I look at it is every time you go somewhere to another country, you're getting exposed to a different society, different people. And that makes you, on one hand, test your own resilience, because that's where you test your ability to integrate into the community, your ability to adapt, but at the same time, you learn a lot. This is like a little bit related to my first experience, because I was studying abroad. And in that period of time, this is what I got myself equipped with: the resilience, adaptability to the new society, community, and then learning a lot. But now when I'm working abroad, this comes a little bit as a challenge as well. And every time you get a challenge in life, you develop and you learn. But then what do you do with that? And what I experienced myself is like, there's so much going on, and there's so many insights that I need to share them with someone. And what I usually do is I share it with my friends, with my family, with my former colleagues, and then I get feedback. And that feedback from my former colleagues makes me think that I am actually not taking away myself from them, but I'm actually contributing to their development in a way. I don't want to be overambitious on saying that, but this is what I feel, that being exposed to new societies, new communities, new cultures, new knowledge, new challenges, we grow and then we share. And I think this is an exceptional phenomenon. And I feel like I'm in no way taking away anything from the community that I left, but opposite, I'm always sharing back. And what also strikes me in the migration is the more you travel, the more you work outside your own country, the more you interact with different cultures and people, the more tolerant you become yourself. Because I don't know, recently I encounter more and more like social biases, or like, you know, the subtle discrimination. And this usually comes from very conservative societies that refrain from exposing themselves to different differences. And migration, in a way, helps you to be more tolerant, because you realize that, yeah, there are different norms and there are different rules in different societies. And the more open and the more exposed you are to them, then you become more tolerant and kind of I don't know, kind-hearted, if we put it in more like a social phenomena. So, I mean, I personally think that migration is good. And there is also a lot of evidence about it. And I don't know, I come across different articles or different opinions where actually there is a lot of evidence showing that people who leave the country, they learn a lot and then they invest back. And same could be about diaspora investment, or same could be when people return to their home countries and then invest into businesses, and then enrich the economic development, the social development, and resilience. So,
back to you, Zenebe. What are the myths on migration?
The first conventional wisdom is that migrants always cross international borders. No, it's not true. A much larger number of migrants are moving within countries and then not between countries. That's the first point that I would like to emphasize. And the second kind of myth or conventional wisdom on migration is we often assume that it is developed countries in Europe or North America that host a large number of migrants. This is not also true. Asia receives over 60% of all international migrants. Intra-regional migration within Asia is still very high and has significantly increased over time. So that means that South-South migration continues to be as relevant as South-North migration. That's because moving regionally is becoming attractive for economic but also social motivations. Thirdly, perhaps we have also kind of a typical kind of image about international migrant, and I need to be honest here. This probably is an African like myself on a rubber boat trying to cross rivers or oceans. Actually, it's not Africa that kind of has become the source of the largest continental international migrants. It's Asia once again. The number of Asian migrants has grown to about 87 million.
The story, it seems, is one-sided. What do you think of immigration versus migration?
Just to give you an example, in April 2019, there was a survey covering 14 countries in Europe, where people were more concerned about immigration with an E than immigration with an I. That is, more worried about people leaving the countries in Europe than those coming in. As you know, population levels in countries such as Spain, Italy, Romania, Greece are either flatlining or falling sharply. And then since also the 2008 economic crisis, young Europeans from these countries have more and more left their countries of origin. So I think it's important when we talk about issues of migration, we need also to challenge some of these myths or misperception or conventional wisdom.
How can development organizations integrate the perspectives of migrants and contribute to large-scale development impacts?
Great question, but not easy to answer. But let me start by saying that the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals explicitly recognize the positive contribution of migration for sustainable and inclusive development by trying to mainstreaming the topic of migration and development through having specific targets. That's a good start. Yet, if the objective is to turn migration into a positive experience for the mutual benefits of countries of destination, transit, and an origin, we need to be aware that migration does not exist in isolation from formal and then informal rules, norms, and values, as well as other related services like skills development, coordination, information. In other words, it is not simply the interaction between migrants' origins and their destinations that determines the outcome of safe and orderly migration. So complex networks of services and then rules are often at play in countries of origin, transit, and destination. So therefore, development organizations, they need to work around what I call the ecosystem of migration in a more facilitative manner to make migrants more informed, empowered, and protected. Perhaps that could offer also better opportunities for a more improved migration management than simply to try to control migration. This is the first point that development organizations need to improve. Secondly, there are also specific entry points which can be leveraged more. Let me give you an example from what is often called the 3 R's, which stand for remittances, returns, and recruitment. For example, a lot has been done to tap into the opportunities that remittances offer. While remittances support migrant countries of origin, their contributions have been less productive, with the exception of increasing consumption and then contributing to jobless growth. That is inflating, the GDP figures of countries. So I think we can tap into the potential of remittances to use them for contributing to better economic development, not just the growth of GDPs. With regard to returns, beyond sending money, which is again related to remittances, migrants also transfer knowledge, resources, technology, ideas to their home countries. Increasingly, circular migration has gained prominence. So migrants have an emotional attachment and then a very strong desire to contribute to the country of origin. Returnees also have the local knowledge, they have also the networks, and then the higher motivation because of collective memory and myth about the homeland, including the desire to return home one day. Yet the role of returnees can play in the development of their countries of origin has been short of its potential. While there are few cases and contributions by returning migrants, these are often carried out on an ad hoc basis, relying mainly on informal networks. There are also cases that significant regulatory barriers seem to discourage potential returnees' desire to contribute to their countries of origin. This is where development organizations can play more role. And then finally, with regard to recruitment as part of one of the R's, the challenge is that skills development through improved levels of education and training may not necessarily keep aspiring migrants from leaving. This is called the migration hump. That means that people with better skills may not be satisfied with the benefits that they get in their local labor markets, and hence they decide to leave. This means that labor market development initiatives by development organizations, we need to be they need to be holistic. That means that it's not just addressing, skills development, but also other dimensions of labor market systems like job matching services and career guidance, as well as the creation of decent and well-paying jobs. Even if people decide to leave after increasing their skills, if they leave equipped with different types of skills to meet the challenges of life in the countries of destination, and then to contribute meaningfully to their newfound home, so to speak. So evidence shows that migrant workers face some of the most serious decent work deficits, that is exploitation and abuse, in particular at the recruitment stage. This is a consequence of how recruitment is organized, regulated, and then monitored. So multilateral organizations like the ILO and then other development organizations like Helvetas are increasingly working on this issue of migration. That's recruitment. So these are some of the areas where development organizations can have a facilitative role to contribute to making migration a positive experience for mutual benefits for countries of origin, countries of transit, and countries of destination.
So there are some estimates, according to the United Nations mainly, that the Western Balkans can become a source of in-migration in the future rather than a source of out-migration, which sounds very unrealistic to us given the situation at the moment. But of course, if our countries, stabilize both economically and politically and enter the European Union, then it's certainly a possibility. But in terms of fertility, to go back to that, because of course these issues are always interrelated, even in migration won't really make a lot of difference. It will make a lot of difference, of course, for the workforce size, but long term, it won't raise the fertility, probably won't raise the fertility rate enough for the workforce size to benefit from this indefinitely in the future. Because usually what happens when people from lower fertility countries migrate to countries with, from countries of higher fertility, migrate to countries with lower fertility, then their fertility tends to converge over time with the fertility of the country of arrival, with the new country. So in Germany, for example, or Italy, when there are migrants arriving from the Middle East, mainly in the German case, in the short term, their fertility tends to be higher than the fertility of the local population, but very quickly, even within a generation, sometimes it actually converges towards the lower level, the original level of fertility in the population. So migration can be very helpful in migration, of course, but it's not a permanent solution to population aging.
I don't know, I personally think that human beings are inclined towards freedom. We always strive for freedom, and COVID-19 comes with a lot of restrictions that are putting the burden on us psychologically and also emotionally. I wanted to share a bit of the aha moment that I had recently, because not very long ago I did an interview with one of the senior experts in that field. And what struck me is that she related the migration phenomena to the historical reasons for migration. And she mentioned that the people were moving all the time, despite various factors. And then the movement of people, the free movement of people, will not be dramatically affected in the future. This is like a natural urge of people to get out and explore and learn. So from that point of view, the migration will still happen. It just maybe will change some of the shapes, but the migration as such, and I share that. I don't think that this will change significantly the phenomena, maybe some patterns, but not dramatically.
Migration is a historic, an economic, and social reality that is here to stay, and then even may increase in the coming decades because of the impact of climate change or regional demographic development and then other reasons. First of all, shocks like COVID might have affected the trends and patterns of migration. However, fundamental factors that have been at the heart of driving human mobility for decades and centuries, they are here to stay. They are not going to change fundamentally. For example, demographic dynamics, deficit of the labor force in high-income countries, and then other factors. What this means, secondly, is that more and more work is needed for an effective governance of migration through partnership between countries of origin, transit, and destination. To give you an example, the Global Compact for Migration is a good initiative that seeks to achieve such an objective through creating conducive conditions that try to enable migrants to enrich societies through their human, economic, and social capacities. So I think there is a need for these multi-stakeholder initiatives through partnerships among the different countries. And thirdly, the future of migration as a positive experience will require increased generation of evidence that can be used for evidence-informed advocacy so that we can all make migration beneficial to countries of origin, transit, and destination. Here, while international migration receives a lot of attention in policy discussions, what is really lacking is the focus on internal migration, internal mobility, which is also an important and significant livelihood strategy. I also expect increased attention and then more work on documenting and advocating for the role of internal migration for inclusive and then sustainable development. So I see the future of migration to be shaped, to be influenced around these key areas and issues.
All right, this was the second round of Inclusive Plug powered by Reconomy. We have interesting topics coming up, so stay tuned and hit the subscribe button. Whether you agree or disagree with the ideas expressed by our guests, please send us your feedback or comments. This was Sabine, a communication manager at Reconomy, a program of the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency implemented by Helvetas in 12 countries in Eastern Europe, South Caucasus, and the Western Balkans. Thank you for tuning in and see you soon.